Greetings everyone and welcome to my little garden. In today's video, we are going to be looking at a very special deck profile for the Digimon card game. This time, we are going to be building a deck based on one of my favorite DigiTubers, TheDigiKnow. Now, TheDigiKnow himself actually doesn't play the Digimon card game, but we're gonna try our best to make a deck profile based on the aesthetics of his channel and also the TheDigiKnow himself. So just a disclaimer, this deck is not necessarily meant to be extremely competitive. That being said, it does have a lot of powerful elements incorporated into the deck itself, so you might be surprised by its performance. So with that out of the way, let's get started and I hope you enjoy. Okay, so we are going to be starting off with the Digi Eggs. We are going to be playing a full set of 5 Digi Eggs, 1 copy of this Demi-Vmon right here, 2 copies of this other Demi-Vmon, and then 2 copies of Upamon. Now, the reason why we are using this kind of weird ratio is because I don't actually have access to 4 copies of the Demi-Vmons that we see right here. If it was up to me, I would rather be having up to 4 copies of this or 4 copies of this, but we are going to be working with what we got. And it's also perfect because both Upamon and Demi-Vmon are 2 of the main baby Digimon that appears in Digimon 02, which is actually the TheDigiKnow's favorite Digimon adventure season. So we are going to be using more Digimon that caters to that as we go on more to the deck profile. Now let's just explain the uses of each Digitama here. Now starting with Upamon, Upamon is probably the best and most consistent Digi Egg that Blue has seen for over the course of the game's lifetime. Now that being said, the effects reads, when attacking once per turn, if your opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution cards in play, trigger draw 1. This is one of the very best draw engines that you can use for Blue. Now, Demi-Vmon here is actually quite similar, and for the purposes of this deck, might actually be more powerful than the Upamon. It has a very similar effect when attacking once per turn. If this Digimon has jamming, then you trigger draw 1. And we're going to be using quite a bit of Digimon that actually has the jamming ability. Now, this Demi-Vmon here is the only oddball out of the group. We don't get to draw any cards from using this card. However, once per turn, when this Digimon becomes unsuspended during your main phase, then it gets 1000 DP for the turn. Now, there are several chances in which we can actually unsuspend our Digimon. However, this won't come up as often as the other 2, unfortunately. And also, unfortunately, this is kind of our only way of increasing the DP of our Digimon, so we gotta be really careful about where to place this. Preferably we should be placing this on top of a Digimon that will do a lot of offensive actions for us. But that is it for our Digi Eggs. Let's move on to our rookies. Alright, next we are going to be using a total of, I believe, 14 rookies is what I put into this deck. Let's just take a double look. So we have 4 copies of Vmon, 2 copies of Terriermon, 4 copies of Gomamon, and 4 copies of another Gomamon here. This is from the starter deck and it's a vanilla. Okay, so let's take a look at the Gomamon first because these are a little bit less important. Now, we're using 4 copies of starter deck Gomamon because it is only 2 to play and that makes it incredibly efficient. You can just slap it onto the field and away you go. You can start digivolving from there, and it's really cheap, like I said, so that just makes everything efficient. Now, this Gomamon here, This Gomamon here has an on-deletion effect of gain 1 memory. It is an inherited skill, so you have to digivolve into another Digimon in order to actually use this. This gives us the opportunity to be rewarded for allowing the opponent to actually destroy our Digimon. And this makes it so that the opponent might actually be hesitant to destroy our Digimon. But this is more so of a filler type of card. We can digivolve it from the raising area, or we can directly play it into the battlefield. As long as we are able to get some value out of the gain 1 memory effect, that's doing its job perfectly. Okay, now for the main stars of this deck though, we are going to be looking at Vmon and Terriermon. Now Vmon is going to be the Digimon that you want to be digivolving from the raising area. It has an effect right here that says, your turn once per turn. When this Digimon becomes unsuspended during your main phase, trigger draw 1. And like I said previously, we are going to be using quite a bit of instances in which we get to actually unsuspend our Digimon. And in case you guys didn't know, Vmon is one of the 2 favorite Digimon of our boy DigiKnow. And the other favorite Digimon is going to be Terriermon. Now, you can see here that we're using 12 blue rookies and then 2 green rookies. Terriermon is going to be therefore unable to digivolve in the battle, in the raising area. We have to hard play it in the battle area, but that is fine. What we want Terriermon for is the extremely valuable effects that it brings. It says here, during all turns, your opponent cannot gain memory except with Tamer effects. So this does limit some effects that your opponent can take advantage of. Most notably, it shuts down any attempts of using cards like Hammer Spark and Jack Raid and Blinding Ray. Your opponent can use those cards to gain memory. They can only use the effects of their Tamers. And this is really good to just have out in the field. Sometimes Terriermon might be a target for your opponent to destroy immediately, but that also makes it so that your other Digimon might be a little bit less aggro. Vmon, like I said, you want to be using this as an inherited skill to pass on to your bigger, larger Digimon, and we are going to be moving on to our champions and see how we're going to get to our bigger, larger Digimon. Alright, time for our champions, and this time we're going to be using 12 champions, or 12 adult Digimon. We're going to be using 4 copies of Gorillamon, 4 copies of Tobiumon, and 4 copies of Sealamon. Now, if you are a longtime player of the Digimon card game, you might notice something very specific here. Every single Digimon that we're using in our champion lineup will only evolve for a cost of 1 memory. That makes them incredibly efficient. Now, I picked this type of strategy for our champions because, much like DigiKnow himself, he is an extremely efficient guy when it comes to his scheduling and putting out his content, and I want to put that efficiency sort of manifesting into our deck profile here. So being able to evolve for only 1 memory is an extremely memory efficient way of being able to become a stronger form without passing your turn to your enemy. And this helps out with that because your enemy has to give you at least 1 memory to pass it on to your turn, and this one allows you to not just digivolve during your turn, but potentially digivolve again into a level 5 Digimon and then pass it to their turn. This is why it is extremely efficient. Now, both Gorillamon and Tobiumon are similar in a sense that neither neither of them have any particularly special abilities to talk about. Gorillamon is going to be most likely the one that you will be digivolving into the hatching area. However, Tobiamon, you can do that as well, but what I'm using Tobiamon for is that we are using this sort of as a safety net. As you can recall earlier, we are only able to work with 14 rookies and only 12 of them are actually blue. Now this kind of makes up for our lack of blue rookies, because for only 3 to play, we can actually just slap this onto the battle area just like that vanilla Gomamon without having to pay too much memory before we pass the turn into our opponent, and we can turbo this into our level 5s, which is actually where most of the action of this deck comes from. This deck actually focuses on their ultimate level Digimon in order to get the gears rolling. And then we also have 4 copies of Sealamon. That just makes it so that we have an incredibly efficient blocker that we can use, and of course we definitely want to have blockers in some way, shape, or form. We don't necessarily have to keep Sealamon in the battlefield. We can actually choose to digivolve on top of it, but for the most part we would like to have Sealamon present in case we need its ability to block for us. Now let's move on to our level 5s. Alright, here are the level 5s. As I've mentioned earlier, this deck actually likes to get started as soon as we digivolve into our level 5 Digimon. And if you saw the Demi Vmon and the Vmon earlier, then you know why. Because we are playing Paildramon. Now, we are playing 4 copies of Paildramon, 4 copies of Dino Beamon, and then just 1 copy of Shakomon. Okay, let me explain. As I've mentioned before, DigiKnow's favorite Digimon Adventure season was Digimon Adventure 02. So this is where the Shakomon and the Paildramon come from. Now, Paildramon is this really amazing level 5 that allows you to gain the ability of jamming, which synergizes with a couple of our Digi Eggs from earlier, the 2 little Demi Vmons from earlier. Now, jamming allows us to attack security without being defeated by an opponent's security Digimon. This means that even if we check security and the Digimon that appears has a higher DP than 7,000, Paildramon will survive. Paildramon will say it doesn't care about that and it will destroy the security anyway. Now, similarly to Paildramon, Dino Beamon also has jamming, but where these two differ would be the other effects that they bring. Now, Paildramon has an inherited effect that it cannot use until it digivolves into a level 6, which we are going to get into later. It says, when attacking once per turn, if this Digimon has Imperial Dramon in its name, unsuspended. Yes, we are going to be using Imperial Dramon, and we're going to get into that when we get to our level 6s. But for now, just know that we would probably prefer to digivolve Paildramon into our level 6s. Now that being said, Dino Beamon is still not a bad option to be digivolving from. However, more so than Paildramon, this actually does a better job at checking security at this stage of evolution. At only level 5, not only does it have jamming, which means that it is mostly safe from checking security Digimon, it also has piercing, which means it punishes the opponent for attempting to block you. Because piercing here says when this Digimon attacks and deletes an opponent's Digimon and survives the battle, it performs any security checks it normally would. So that is an extremely powerful effect to pair with a jamming ability, because if your opponent has a suspended Digimon, then you can actually swing over that suspended Digimon and still get security checks going. And also the piercing makes it so that it discourages your opponent from actually blocking you at all. Now, what is up with the Shakomon, though? Well, like I said, Shakomon is a 02 adventure Digimon, and even though it's a yellow card, it is actually okay for us to put it in this deck because it can digivolve from a blue Digimon. Now, that's a thing about our level 5s here, is that they have the ability to digivolve from different colored Digimon, but for the purposes of this deck, since we are using 12 blue champions, we are going to want all of our ultimate level Digimon to be able to digivolve from blue Digimon, and all 3 types here are able to digivolve from blue. Shakomon mostly serves to be as a filler Digimon. It does have a really neat effect that comes along with it, saying your turn, this Digimon is also treated as blue, which means we are allowed to play blue option cards if this Digimon is on the field. And also during the opponent's turn, all of the opponent's Digimon with no Digivolution cards gain security attack -1. This essentially means that if your opponent has Digimon with no evolution sources, they probably can't attack your security unless they actually bolster their security attack so that it overcomes this. But for the most part, it does counter things like Malomayotismon. It's really nice to have, but you will prefer to play Paildramon and Dynambimon for the purposes of this deck way more often than Shakomon, but there will be some cases where Shakomon can be pretty useful. It's more like a tech option, more so than anything. Now, that being said, as long as you have Paildramon and Dynambimon, you can comfortably start to get your offenses going. You can comfortably start checking the opponent's security without much fear of losing to their security. And that's it for our level 5s. Let's move on to the next set of cards. Alright, now we're going to be moving on to the arguably the main stars of the deck. Our level 6s, we are going to be using 3 copies of Imperial Dramon Green, 3 copies of Imperial Dramon Dragon Mode Blue, and 1 copy of Goldramon. Now, let me just explain Goldramon first. Now, Goldramon doesn't really do much for the purposes of this deck. It is just here as a 7th level 6 because we need some kind of 7th level 6 to begin with. Goldramon I chose because it kind of reminds me of that event in which the DigiKnow, Digimon Central, and Base Digimon were all targeted by a fake Toei account. And it was around that time when a special episode that featured Goldramon was also about to air, when this was all happening. And I would like to think of it as Goldramon being like symbolic to that moment where these DigiTubers were able to overcome that terrible situation. So that's why we have Goldramon here. And we're definitely not using Goldramon to cover up the fact that I do not have a 4th copy of Imperial Dramon Dragon Mode. Definitely not. But for the most part, when it comes to level 6s, you will want to be using Imperial Dramon Dragon Mode. Okay, so let's start off with the green version here. So this one, actually, let me just explain the mechanics of both of them because they both have a similar mechanic in which if your Paildramon or Dynambimon would digivolve into this card, then you can reduce the memory cost of the Digivolution by 2. As you can see here, the value of Digivolution that it normally would cost would be 5, but as long as you're digivolving from a Paildramon or Dynambimon, you're essentially digivolving for only 3, which makes them very memory efficient, but they kind of do different things. Now, the green one, just like Dynambimon, also has the piercing ability. It no longer has the jamming ability of Dynambimon or Paildramon, but your turn once per turn, when this Digimon deletes an opponent's Digimon in battle and survives, you can unsuspend this Digimon. This is absolutely fantastic. It allows you to punish your opponent's unsuspended Digimon. At 12,000 DP, it is capable of beating over a lot of Digimon that are level 6, which a lot of them tend to lie on the 11,000 DP range. So Imperial Dramon Dragon Mode can absolutely overpower them and still check the opponent's security. It may not have the jamming, but it still has a high survival rate thanks to the 12,000 DP. Now, speaking of jamming, that is what this blue iteration of Imperial Dramon can do. When digivolving though, you can unsuspend all of your Digimon with jamming, and this includes Imperial Dramon Dragon Mode itself. Now, this makes it so that if you start off your turn with 3 memory, and then you decide to attack using Dino Beamon or Paildramon, you can digivolve into Imperial Dramon Dragon Mode and then unsuspend them again for another security check. And because it has jamming, it is also safe from incredibly powerful cards that might be hiding in the security stack, such as Omnimon and Armageddonmon, etc, etc. Jamming is extremely powerful. It allows us to facilitate some effects from our inherited effects, and preferably this would have been the card that I would have 4 copies of, but I only have the 3, so we're just gonna work with what we got. Plus, it was a nice excuse for me to put Goldramon into our stack as well. So that's it for our level 6s. Let's move on to our Tamers. Alright, so we have our Tamers, and we're gonna be using 4 copies of Tamers here, and this would not be a DigiKnow deck unless we use at least 2 copies of Izzy Izumi. So we definitely want Izzy because this is a DigiKnow deck after all, and Izzy is the mascot, the avatar of DigiKnow's channel, and that's why we're going to be using him. And then we have 1 copy of Ken and 1 copy of Davis. Now, let me just explain Ken and Davis first. Like I said, DigiKnow's favorite anime season for Digimon Adventure was 02, and we're going to be placing the 2 main characters of 02 so that we can so that we can bolster the theme of DigiKnow's deck here. Now, both of them work very well with this deck because it focuses on Imperial Dramon, and Imperial Dramon decks tend to have a combination of both green and blue Digimon, as we've seen earlier. Now, Davis here allows you to reveal the top 3 cards of your deck and then add 1 blue and 1 green Digimon card among them to your hand, and place the remaining cards at the bottom of your deck in any order. Now, at worst, you might only be able to draw 1 card out of revealing 3, but at best you can actually draw 2 cards, and that happens quite a bit often in my experience, at least, because we are playing a fair number of both green and blue Digimon cards. We should be okay with using Davis here. And then we also have Ken here. Ken, out of the 3 Tamers that we're using, has more of a long-term effect, and I'll explain that a little bit more later. Now, during our turn, when one of your green or blue Digimon deletes an opponent's Digimon in battle and survives, you can suspend this Tamer to gain 1 memory. This is when using the green Imperial Dramon Dragon Mode and also the green Dino Beamon in our decks come in really handy. Ken synergizes with those cards extremely well, and that's why we're going to use him, and also he allows us to gain 1 memory if we can successfully delete the opponent's Digimon, and most of the time between Imperial Dramon and Dino Beamon we certainly can do that. And then we have 2 copies of Izzy here. Now, on play, reveal the top 3 cards of your deck, and if all the cards revealed are black, gain 1 memory, and then place the cards on top of your deck in any order. Now, you might be wondering why on earth would be using black Tamers on a deck that focuses on green and blue Digimon. Well, the nice thing about Izzy, this specific Izzy, is that it actually allows you to manipulate the cards that you are going to be drawing from the top of your deck. Because even if you don't benefit from the gain 1 memory for revealing nothing but black cards, because that's never ever going to happen, you still have the power to rearrange the top 3 cards of your deck in any order. And you can do this maybe twice during a play run. And that's why Izzy is really useful in any color deck actually, because you can manipulate the top of your deck in a very strategic way depending on what is revealed. For example, if you're desperate for having a rookie in your card, you can place Izzy, and if you reveal a rookie, you can immediately put that rookie at the very top of your deck, which guarantees the next time you draw a card, you will have that rookie immediately. And that's why Izzy is so powerful. And I also like this style of play because it really is such a DigiKnow thing to do. We like to be prepared. We like to have foresight and planning involved in our strategies. And it just feels like a very DigiKnow thing to do because he is a very generally well thought out, well prepared guy when it comes to presenting his content. And Izzy not only is the avatar of his YouTube channel, but is also very representative of his content creation uploading style. So I just really like that, and that's why we gotta have 2 copies of him. Now, all 3 of our Tamers here have the exact same base effect though. At the start of our turn, if we have 2 memory or less, then we set it to 3. So having any single one of these Tamers played for us allows us to never be choked during our turn, because we will always guarantee ourselves 3 memory at the very, very least. So, and 3 memory is also highly efficient. That is enough to digivolve into a Paildramon or Dinobemon. That is enough to digivolve into an Imperial Dramon or a Goldramon. So we're good to go if at the very least we see at least one of these Tamers come up. In my experience, at least 2 of them like to show up. So we get really efficient really fast a lot of the time. Okay, and that's it for our Tamers. And then finally, we are going to be talking about our option cards. And for the purposes of this deck, we are only using 4 option cards. 2 copies of Death Parade, 1 copy of Positron Laser, and 1 copy of Hidden Potential Discovered. Now, as you can see here, all of these cards feature art from Zero Adventure 2 Digimon here. We have Paildramon and Imperial Dramon and also Stingmon here. It's unfortunate. I really want to use more efficient cards like Hammer Spark, but we are trying to stay on theme here. But at the very least, the cards that we are using for our options are very helpful to begin with. First, let's start off with Death Parade Blaster. Now, the main effect would be trash up to 2 Digivolution cards from the bottom of all of your opponent's Digimon. Then, if you have a green Digimon in play, suspend 1 of your opponent's Digimon with no Digivolution cards. This is like using a more expensive version of Flower Cannon in my opinion, but also this synergizes so well with the green Imperial Dramon and the Dinobemon, because since we can force our opponent's Digimon to be suspended, we actually will be able to beat over them and also take advantage of those piercing mechanics. And also, if the opponent finds this in your security stack, you can also activate this card's main effect. Even if you are not strong enough to defeat an opponent's suspended Digimon, you're at least weakening them by removing some of their Digivolution sources, which can be really irritating to your opponent. And then we have Positron Laser. The main effect would be up to 2 of your opponent's Digimon cannot attack or block until the end of your opponent's next turn. Then, if you have a blue Digimon in play, return 1 of your opponent's suspended Digimon to its owner's hands. So this is a form of removal and a form of control. Now, this synergizes well if we have a blue Digimon present in the battlefield. So let's think of blue Imperial Dramon and Paildramon. Now, this is a good way of stopping your opponent from potentially swarming you if they have 2 or 3 Digimon in their field. And if you have a blue Digimon in your side of the field, you can even return one of your opponent's suspended Digimon. That's if they have a suspended Digimon though. If they don't, you are at least freezing up to two opponent Digimon, so that's actually fairly nice. If your opponent activates this during their security check, then up to two of your opponent's Digimon can't attack for the rest of the turn. Then if you have a blue Digimon in play, you can still return one of your opponent's suspended Digimon to their hand. Now this is a more guaranteed way of actually returning one of your opponent's Digimon back to their hand, because when your opponent declares an attack on your security, then they will probably have to suspend their Digimon most of the time anyway, so then that allows you to activate the effects of Positron Laser. Now, if it was up to me, I would be playing multiple copies of this next card here, Hidden Potential Discovered. Now, this is an extremely powerful card, and in accordance to official Bandai rules, you are only allowed to play one copy of this in your deck, so that's why we only have one copy of Hidden Potential Discovered. Now, let's check out why this card is so powerful. Main effect: the next time one of your green Digimon digivolves during this turn, you may suspend one of your Digimon to reduce the memory cost of the Digivolution by 5. Now, this allows us to essentially digivolve for free. We don't have a Digivolution cost any higher than 5 memory, so we can potentially digivolve into an Imperial Dramon for free. Now, Imperial Dramon is already memory efficient, being able to reduce its cost from 5 to 3, but by using Hidden Potential Discovered, you can suspend one of your other Digimon instead, like the Terriermon, for example, in order to digivolve into a powerful Imperial Dramon without passing any memory to your opponent. This is so amazing because you can sit at 0 memory and still have the option to attack during your turn because you are digivolving for free. That's why this card is so powerful. It doesn't come up very often because you're only using one copy of it, but when it does, consider taking advantage of it. Unfortunately, the only way for us to be using this card in this deck is if we are digivolving Dino Beamon specifically, because Dino Beamon is the only card that we can link into another Digivolution stage that is also green. So we have a slight limitation there, but considering we're only using one copy of Hidden Potential Discovered, that's not too hard to work with. And also, you're going to be working with your Tamers, and usually you're spending just 3 memory at a time anyway, so most of the time you're going to be pretty efficient with your memory management. But when you have this and all the stars align, your opponent is going to be in so much trouble. So keep that in mind, and that is it for the entire deck. Alright, we are going to briefly go over some of the strategies that we can utilize in this type of deck. Now, with this stack that you see here, this is what the ideal stack of this deck looks like. Now, technically you can have Paildramon up here or even Dino Beamon, but since we are going to be digivolving into a level 6, it's nice to have a little bit more than a few inherited skills to work off of. Now, Paildramon alone benefits so much from the inherited skills it gets from Vmon and Demi-Vmon. So you go ahead, declare an attack, you have jamming, and it says here, when this Digimon becomes unsuspended during your main phase, trigger draw 1. Now this won't activate unless we decide to digivolve Paildramon, so keep that in mind. However, we can at least activate the effect of Demi-Vmon here. Now if this Digimon has jamming, and when you declare attack once per turn, you trigger draw 1. So just by declaring an attack as Paildramon or Dino Beamon, you can draw another card from your deck, which is really, really powerful. Now here's another way of doing this. After you benefit from Vmon right here, Demi-Vmon right here, then you can digivolve Paildramon into the blue Imperial Dramon Dragon Bone. Now, according to the rules of the game, you have to digivolve. If your Paildramon was suspended like that and you decide to digivolve, then you also have to start Imperial Dramon here suspended just like this. However, thanks to its Digivolution effects, you can unsuspend all of your Digimon with jamming, including Imperial Dramon himself. Now, when this card unsuspends, that's when we can take advantage of Veemon's effect here, because once per turn, when this Digimon becomes unsuspended, we can trigger a draw 1. Now, this allows us to draw even more cards this way. Now, this is one of the best ways of utilizing your Digivolution stacks, and let's talk about another way that we can do that. Alright, so this is another example of a very ideal Digivolution stack. Having Dino Beamon in the battlefield means that you can declare an attack and you won't worry usually about blockers because your opponent typically won't have a blocker that is strong enough to survive a 7000 DP Digimon. Now, Dino Beamon can still digivolve into Imperial Dramon Blue, just like we stated earlier, and then it can unsuspend itself, but also you can keep it as a Dino Beamon and then just kind of keep the opponent discouraged from deleting you or attacking over you because of the Gomamon inherited effect here. And also, if you decide to go all out and just go straight into the Imperial Dramon Dragon mode, then it's just basically an even buffer Dino Beamon, just without the jamming, unfortunately, but that is absolutely okay. Another way of doing this is simply hard playing the Tobiomon directly into the field, because sometimes you don't have rookies in hand. That can happen, bricking sucks, but then you can immediately digivolve into a Dino Beamon or even a Paildramon, and then just get things going from there, because as I mentioned earlier, as long as you digivolve into one of these two, you are actually able to freely attack your Digimon, your opponent's security stack, as soon as you have these available. Of course, they're going to be a bit weaker than the Imperial Dramon, but having the jamming as soon as possible puts a lot of pressure on your opponent, and it is just an efficient way of getting that pressure going very early on in the game. And your opponent might be forced to do something drastic, such as maybe using a Gaia Force to try and remove you immediately, which just ends up giving you a lot of memory anyway. And so that's it for some of our strategies. Get really creative with this, you guys. There are so many ways that you can win using this deck. And that is it for the deck profile. I hope you guys enjoyed this deck profile. This was so much fun to do, and I hope that this is approved by DigiKnow. This was an extremely fun little project that I've been keeping at the back burner for quite some time, and I'm glad that it finally all comes together. And as it turns out, it is actually pretty powerful. Now, if you are a regular player of the Digimon card game, then you know why it's powerful. Imperial Dramon is just such an incredible Digimon to be playing with. However, this version of an Imperial Dramon deck is not as competitively optimized, because we are just trying to sort of give our appreciation, show our appreciation to our DigiTuber here. So you work with what you got most of the time. But you know what? Despite some of the modifications that we've made on this deck, it still does pretty well. And I hope that somebody is crazy enough to use it in a competitive setting. I know some of you are. Okay, everyone, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more content. Thank you so much for watching, and train hard, Tamers!